Good. So welcome again to the fourth of our visits. My name's Margaret Haig and I'm the current chairman of the fellowship, the Orthodox Fellowship of St John the Baptist. And we bring together members of the different Orthodox church traditions in the British Isles and Ireland. As we are less able anyway to travel around at the moment, and we haven't been able to have a summer conference, we thought we would organise this series of sessions visiting monasteries virtually. And we are going to different monasteries each week using Zoom. We've already been to Ukraine, Greece and Romania, and those recordings are actually already on our website. So if you missed those, please do go and watch them another time. And tonight we will be visiting Russia, and we still have the USA and Lebanon to come. So I've been really grateful for the feedback we've had about these sessions so far. People seem to have really appreciated them, but I hope you will continue to appreciate them as well. I'm going to do the boring bit first, which is our policy. I'm going to paste that into the chat box. Now, for those who are not familiar with Zoom, I will just give a very brief explanation. So if you're on a computer and you want to see what's in the chat, you need to click on the chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen, which is a speech bubble which says chat. And that's where we'll be asking you to put your questions to Anna this evening. But that's also a place where you can just put questions as you go along. If you're on a phone or other mobile device, and you can only see one screen at a time, you may have to swipe or tap to find the chat function. So if you do want to ask a question later, you'll need to find that on your phone. So you could maybe get to grips with your phone or device now, and hopefully that will work later. The other thing to mention is that you may well be on what's called gallery view. So if you're on a computer, you may have lots of square boxes with people in them. So hello to everyone. But what we would recommend is when you're listening to the presentation this evening, put it on speaker view so that you'll hear and see Anna clearly when she's speaking. And she'll be presenting some slides as well, and that works best in speaker view. Again, if you're on a phone, you might need to swipe just to get to that on your device. Okay, those are the sort of logistical bits. Now on to the more interesting bits, but first a plea for money, which I think is only right. These events we're running completely free, and we're happy to be running these for free for you to enjoy and put the recordings online as well. But we will be making a donation from the Fellowship of St John the Baptist to each of the monasteries that we feature in this series. If you would like to make a donation to add to that amount that we will be donating, again, I've put the link in the chat box, but that link is also on our website. So if you'd like to make a donation, you can do it that way. And thank you for your generosity for those who've already given something. It's really wonderful, and we'll announce how much the final amount is at the end of the series. Right, so back to the interesting part of tonight. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Dr. Anna Rogozhina from Moscow. She's a senior lecturer at the School of Asian Studies at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow. But more pertinent to tonight, Anna's family has been closely associated with the monastery at Optina since the 1980s, having been one of the families which went there regularly, even when there were no pilgrim facilities. And I think you may well see some of that in the presentation this evening. Anna studied for her DPhil in Oxford and sang in the Mosaic Choir, which is where I met her. I wanted to visit Optina ever since Anna and I were in Walsingham in Norfolk with Mosaic, where we listened to the campanile in the quiet evening. And this new year, just gone, I was blessed to visit Optina with Anna and stood beneath the enormous bell tower there while it played, having been to one of the 5 liturgies, I think it was 5, held that day in the beautiful churches at Optina. And I cannot wait to hear more. I'll be passing over to Anna shortly, but after the presentation, as I said, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. So type these into the chat as we go along in case you forget, and we'll get through as many as we can at the end. So, Anna, over to you. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Margaret, for inviting me. This is, of course, a wonderful opportunity to see old friends and to make new friends. And also, for me, this is the most amazing opportunity to share about, well, my personal experience and also some of my, favorite places, my favorite memories, and not just mine, but also those of many, many Russian people. So I'm going to talk about the monastery called Optina. So for the purpose of to make it shorter, I will just use this name, Optina. But the full name of the monastery is the Monastery of the Entry of the Mother of God to the Temple. Is it something wrong with my... No? Okay. I'm just... Sorry. I saw people waving and I thought, there's something wrong with my, probably something is wrong with my sound. So I'm going to share my screen with you and to show you some pictures from this monastery, which is dedicated to the entry of the Mother of God to the temple. So its official name is Свято-Веденская Optina Pustin. And you will see pictures and videos that I have taken from the official website of the monastery. Oops. Sorry. I have to start from the beginning.
I should just say that that is not a picture from Optina. That's Anna's profile picture, but it's rather wonderful.
Sorry. Oh, as usual. Yes, I hope you can see it now. Probably not.
You haven't got shared screen at the moment.
Yes, that's what I thought, sorry.
Okay.
Oh dear, I have done this so many times because I've been teaching online and just the moment when you need it, it gets weird.
There we are, yeah.
Should be okay. Okay, so this is an old painting of Optina made at the end of the 19th century. As you can see, and it is a view that pilgrims that arrived to Optina would see from the other side of the small river Zhizdra. Well, it's not that small, as you can think. Some people say it's small. It's not very deep. It's rather shallow, but it has a very strong current, so you cannot cross it at most times. And if you arrive at spring, normally it gets getting much wider, so you cannot cross, and you need to use the ferry. So if we were pilgrims, and this is us, who arrived to Optina to worship all the holy icons and to see the elders of Optina, this is how we would get there. We would cross the river with a ferry, and then we would walk towards the holy gates. And you can see here the tower with the golden angel on top of it. So it's like, a weather thing, a weather top. This used to be the main monastery gate. So people would enter from this side. It's not that now, it's not used. For some reason, it's not possible to use this as the main gate, and all the roads have been changed around the monastery, but you will see why, because this happened during the 20th century. And normally people would enter through these holy gates and they would walk up the stairs, and that's what they would see when they enter the monastery. So it was a huge monastery, with many churches, 3 big churches inside, and some churches outside the monastery walls. And also there were lots of chapels which do not exist anymore. So this is the view of Optina as it was seen by the pilgrims in the 19th century, when Optina was at its height and when thousands of people came there every day. So I'm going to show you where people actually wanted to come. This was their goal, not the monastery itself, but the skit. The skit of Optina, which is dedicated to Saint John the Forerunner, which is quite symbolic, I'd say, because it's also the patron saint of the brotherhood, of the fellowship. And this was the heart, let's say, of the spiritual life of Optina. This is where the famous elders or starci of Optina dwelt. And you can see here on the right to the gates, you can see the stairs, this little house. This was called the hut. And this is where some of the starci lived. And this is where they accepted pilgrims. And this was the way for women to actually enter and to talk to one of the elders and to ask their questions, because no women were allowed in the skit. The skit was closed to female visitors, and it's closed to female visitors now again. So it's male only, and not every male person is admitted. It's only for the monks who live in the skit, and also some, special guests, I'd say, but mostly it's closed because of the very strict way of life that they are observing there. So this is another archival photo from the skit, and you can see the inhabitants, let's say, and you can see how many trees they had there. And that's probably why people who visited the skit described it as paradise on earth, or Garden of Eden, because it had many, many trees and flowers, and it was always in blossom, some flowers or trees, and there was always some beautiful scent coming from one of the plants. And people who were blessed to live in the skit loved it as the very special place. And I will talk about one person who left us a very detailed description of the skit. I will come to him later. That's one of the starci, one of the last elders of Optina, Elder Nikon, who came to Optina as a very young man and left a diary of his life there. So we can have some glimpses of his daily life there. So people normally gathered around these, you can see these gates, and they would wait here, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. Some of them refused to go anywhere and go to the monastery hostel. They were waiting for an opportunity to talk to the elder and to discuss their serious life problems or spiritual problems. And it wasn't just the simple people like us, like this group of peasants here, or maybe they are merchants, or well, they look like simple people. But it was also people from, let's say, nobility, intelligentsia, as they were called, university professors, writers, public speakers, politicians. Many people came to Optina in the 19th century. It was really, as some people say, the heart of Russia in the 19th century. Why was that? I'm going to talk about that just in a minute. I just want to show you where Optina is situated, so that you might have an idea where on earth is Optina. So here it is. It's situated not far from Moscow, really. It's about 280 kilometers in the Kaluga region, so southwest of Moscow. And the nearest town is Kozelsk, which is a very ancient Russian town. It is older than Moscow, and as we know, it was withstanding the onslaught of the Tatars in the 14th century for 3 months, and the Tatars called it the angry town or the evil town, even though it was a very, very small fortress actually. So they were besieged for 3 months, and they still went strong, and as there was actually no way for them to survive it any longer, because the citizens were dying of starvation and water deprivation. They actually decided to lead an attack on the forces of Batey, and they rushed from the fortress and killed the elite guard of Khan Batey, and he actually turned away. So he besieged the city for 3 months, and then he had to call his troops away. So this is a very famous place. It was never a big a county or a princedom. It was always a very small provincial town, but it has 5 churches apart from Optina, and it was once a very popular little town because so many people visited it to come to Optina. So they would stay in Kozelsk, or they would stay in one of the monastery hostels. But of course, the proximity to Kozelsk, it's about 5 kilometers, maybe 6. So it's very, very close. So now you know where the monastery is, and this is a map which shows you the monastery and the skeet. So down here you see the monastery with all the big churches, and on top of the map you can see the skeet, which is, as you can see, drawn very approximately. It's much smaller than the monastery itself, and you can see that they are separated by a park, or rather a forest, because actually when the skeet was established, it was built in the middle of a very dense forest. And we still have some ancient pine trees which surround the skeet, and you will see them later. So this is the modern view of Optina. As you can see, it's not very different to what it looked before the revolution of 1917. The colors are different. Optina used to be white, and people even, I know someone who wrote a poem about white Optina, but it hasn't been white for many years now. So all the churches have their own separate colors, which is very convenient for children, because you can tell them that you should go to a blue church or to a pink church, because they can't remember all the names. But here you can see the main cathedral in the background. It is light green, and it is the main church of the monastery. The dedication of the monastery is the entry of the Mother of God into the temple, or presentation of the Mother of God, so Vidyansky Khram. On the right, you can see a light pink church, which is dedicated to Saint Mary of Egypt. It is not a very usual dedication for a male monastery, but there we are. And the one at the front, the one you see here in this part of the picture, it's light blue. This is the church dedicated to the Vladimir icon of the Mother of God. So these are 3 of the main churches of Optina. Optina is famous for its sunsets. So if you search Google for Optina, you will come across many pictures that people take of Optina sunsets. Of course, it's a very scenic place, so you will see many, and I wanted to share this one with you. But coming back to the pilgrims and to our visit to the monastery, and the main reason why people came to Optina and why Optina was so special for Russians and for Russia as a country. The reason for that was the elders, or so-called starцы of Optina. So starцы is a Russian name for elderly people. It has a connotation of respect. So starets is someone you respect, an old person who has wisdom. And that is the name that kind of established itself in the Russian tradition, although it wasn't originally called startsy. It was just called spiritual guidance or something like that. The startsy tradition became the main, well, I'd say the main heritage of Optina, because it was spread from Optina to other monasteries, and then it was preserved in Glinskaya Pustin, in other monasteries. So this is a continuous, I would say, continuous chain of spiritual guidance, of helping people, which was transferred from the starets, from the elder, to his disciple, who in his turn became a starets. Normally people say that the first starets of Optina was Leo or Lev, whose monastic name before he took the great schema was Leonid. So you might come across two names for the same person, Leonid or Lev. He died in 1841, and he was the one who brought the tradition to Optina. But he wasn't the only one who did that. His friend and younger, let's say, colleague, although I don't like the name, he wasn't really his disciple in a way, because Father Lev saw Father Makary as his equal. But Father Makary always insisted that he was a disciple of Lev. So they all came to Optina at approximately the same time. The question about the origins of Optina is one of the most debated ones. No one really knows the answer to the question when Optina appeared. You will hear many versions, and if you Google it, you will see many versions on the internet. But none of them are really convincing. And we don't have enough information to say when the monastery actually was founded. Some people say it was established in the 15th century. Some people say it was established in the 16th century. We don't have any real evidence of that. So that's a bit problematic. But what we know is that it existed in some way. It was a very small community. That's why it's called Pustin. Pustin comes from the Russian word pustynia, wilderness. So it defines a very small community, hermitage rather. So there were a few people living there, and the monastery survived somehow the 17th century. But then the 18th century was the most difficult one, because this was the time when Peter the Great started the process of secularization of the lands of the monastic properties. Also then Catherine the Great just took away all the lands, and this monastery was in disrepair, and it wasn't really functioning properly as a monastery. So Metropolitan Platon of Moscow and Kaluga took great care to re-establish it, and he found some money, and he invested some money, and he started to look for experienced monastics who would be able to actually establish proper monastic life there. And that's how he started his search. He was looking for people who would have experience of monastic life and who would not be coming from the capital. And that's how he came across these two brothers, Moisei and Antony, and Moisei and Antony Putilov, who were the first hegumens of Optina, and they were the ones who built the skit. So they were the ones who established a proper monastic life at Optina, and they started to attract people, and they were the ones who invited other people and invited other elders, and they invited Father Lev and Father Makary, and they settled them in Optina. What is interesting is that they started building the skit with their own hands, just the two of them, and they were felling down all those huge trees and whatnot. So it was a huge challenge for both of them. They were not young, but their efforts paid off, let's say. And when Father Lev and Father Makary arrived in 1822, they found the monastery, let's say, to their taste. So it was secluded, it was in the forest, it wasn't very far from the monastery and the skit, I mean, and it was more or less well, acceptable for them to settle there. Although they were looking for a more eremitic life, so for more secluded life, they still accepted the invitation and stayed in Optina. So this is here a schema monk Lev, or Leonid, in his monastic, as his monastic name was. And this is one of his sayings. I chose a few examples, and I hope you will like the ones I selected. There are not many that are available on the internet in English translation. So what I could find, I present to you here. He was, Father Lev came from the line of the disciples of Saint Paisius of Nyans, a very famous studied, a very famous elder who is connected to the region that we discussed in the previous visit to Romania. And the Nyans monastery is in the same area, let's say, as Putna. Maybe not exactly the same county, but not very far from there. So it's the same, more or less the same tradition. And Father Paisius brought the tradition of hesychastic prayer, of inner prayer, and taught his disciples. Also, he started translating into Slavonic the writings of the church fathers, not the church fathers, the monastic writers, let's say, like Dorotheus of Gaza and others. And that was very novel. So Russian, and not only Russian, Moldovan, you name it, Romanian monastics did not really know these writings. So they were not accessible, they were not published, they were not known in the monastic tradition. And that was something very new. So when Father Lev and Father Makary and Fathers Antoni and Moisei began the enterprise, let's say, of establishing a new tradition of teaching the younger generations of monastics of how to pray Jesus prayer, and how to do the monastic, how to live their monastic life. They were very badly treated by the church authorities. And not only by the church authorities, also the civil authorities were involved, and they were reported to the police. They were accused of heresy and of so many other things. And that was a real struggle, I would say, especially for Fathers Moisei and Antoni, Moses and Anthony, because they really suffered from these persecutions. And Father Moses was at some point defrocked, and he was not allowed to have any visitors. And he couldn't do anything because the visitors just continued to come and crowd outside his cell. And when the authorities summoned him and told him stop admitting people, he said, "I cannot do that because I'm the same Moses. You can take my habit from me, but you cannot take the people from me." So this was a very difficult beginning, let's say, of the tradition of the Optina Starchestva of the elders. So this is, it's Makarius, the disciple and a younger friend of Father Lev. He arrived to Optina at the same time. He established a publishing house at Optina, and he started translating from Greek and from Latin also, but mainly from Greek, a series of patristic texts on the spiritual life. And you can see here on the slide some of the authors that he translated. And he involved in that work his younger disciples. And for example, Saint Ambrosi of Optina, Saint Ambrose, was one of the people who took part in this endeavor. So they published a lot. And that was also a very new thing. Nobody did that in Russia in the 19th century. So that was very new. He also published the Philokalia, the Dobrotolюбие. He used the manuscripts provided by Saint Paisius, transmitted from the other disciples. So he was the one who promoted, let's say, the tradition of Saint Paisius of Nyamts. And as I point out here, he was also blamed for spreading knowledge about the Jesus prayer. So that was a problem at that time, that he taught the people to pray with the Jesus prayer, because people say it might give rise to spiritual delusions, or prelest in Russian. So yes, that wasn't an easy time for Optina, despite the fact that so many people came for advice, for a blessing, and for help to Optina. And this is here a schema monk Ambrose, Saint Ambrose or Ambrosi, the most famous among the Optina elders. And this picture shows him as he actually spent 30 years of his life. He was bedridden for most of his life at Optina. He was from a family of a priest, and when he was young, he fell severely ill, and he gave a vow to God that he would become a monk. But then he did not become a monk, and he fell sick again. And then he remembered that he made this promise. So he went to Tambov, to a monastery, and asked from one of the spiritual fathers there, what should I do? Because I gave this promise and I did not keep it. And he was blessed to go to Optina. He was told that he was needed there. So he came there as a young man who had no experience of monastic life, but with an open heart and with a desire to fulfill his promise. But the interesting thing about him was that he was a very good teacher of ancient Greek, because in his earlier years, he got a very good education at the seminary, and he became the helper of Father Macarius. And he translated a lot from Greek, and he also checked the translations, did some editing work, and so on. When he was tonsured and became a monk, and when he was ordained a priest, just a few years after that, he fell sick again. And this time it was very serious. I've looked through the sources. No sources actually tell what the sickness was, but we know that he had constant fevers for 30 years. So every night he would have high fever. He had very bad gastritis. He had bleedings and so on. So he was very, very sick. And he was he got a dispensation from serving as a priest at some point, because he could not stand for more than an hour. So his life turned into a serving to other people, even in this state. He would get up at 4 in the morning, read the matins with his helpers, and then he would start admitting visitors at 6 o'clock. And he would finish admitting the visitors at 11 o'clock in the evening. So that was a whole day spent talking to people, listening to people. When he had some breaks, he would answer his correspondence, because he held huge correspondence with many, many different people, and he managed to answer them. So that was an amazing, I would say, life, and something that inspires me a lot. But not just that, he also established a community for nuns, which is called Shamardina, and this was a very special place. Again, the female monasteries, nun-convents in Russia at that time, were not cenobitic. All the nuns had to have their own source of income. And so younger, not younger, poorer people or women, I mean, widows or sick women, they wouldn't have an opportunity to join a monastic community. Or girls from poor background. And Father Ambrosi decided to change that, and he established a convent, which was called Shamardina. I will not tell you the story of a miraculous finding of that plot of land, because it's another mind-blowing story, but it will take a lot of time. And what you see here is a beautiful cathedral, which was built with the money that people just donated for the cause when St. Ambrose asked them to donate to this monastery. And this monastery admitted everyone. So they would, poor people, poor women, poor girls. They had an orphanage. They had care house for elderly women. So that was the first convent of such kind, and that was a very special place. These are archival photos. As you can see, it has a beautiful, huge cathedral, which was badly damaged in the Soviet period, but I will show you how it looks now. It's a beautiful place and a very scenic valley of a small river, Sirena, which is down there. And the cathedral is really, really big. It's, well, I think it can, there can be like 4,000 people or something, like it's a huge number of people. I don't remember for sure, but this is just really big. And St. Ambrose spent a lot of time there, and he asked for the sisters to build a little house for him so that he could come and visit and stay there. And this is where he spent the last months of his life. And this is the picture of him bedridden again. And this is where he died. So he died in Shamardina, and then his coffin his body was brought by the people, by their hands. So there were so many people that wanted to actually bear the coffin from Shamardina to Optina. So it was a very special time again, and many people came for the funeral. Another important thing about St. Ambrose, Father Ambrosi, is that he hugely influenced the intellectual circles of the 19th century Russia. You probably know that Fyodor Dostoevsky used Starets Ambrosi as his model for Starets Zosima in the Karamazov brothers. So Dostoevsky says that he was so impressed by St. Ambrose that he wanted to include a glimpse of him in the novel, and that's one of the things that we know. And Dostoevsky also mentioned that Optina gave him a huge support at a very difficult time of his life. So he was just one of the writers that came there. Another famous person, as you probably know, is Leo Tolstoy, who came to Optina just before his death. And as we know, he probably wanted to reconcile with the Russian Orthodox Church, but he couldn't really, well, change his ways. And that's how he never actually met the Startsi. He came to the skit, but he didn't enter. But his sister was a nun at Chamardina, and she prayed for his soul, as we know, for many years. So this is Starets Ambrosi, and this is another person that I would like to show you just before I move on, because Margaret is showing me signs that I only have 20 minutes left. And this is one of the last starts of Optina, Hieromonk Nikon. He was the disciple of Starets of Elder Varsanofi, and he was the one who took care of the monks and all the people who loved Optina when the monastery was closed. So he was the one who took the confessions from the remaining monks and nuns in the late 20s. And then he was arrested and sent to one of the camps. He was then diagnosed with tuberculosis, and then was just discharged from prison, but was not allowed to return to Optina. And he ended his life in a place called Piniga. But why I wanted to talk about him is that, as I said, he was one of those young people who came to Optina at a very young age, and he left a diary of his life there. And also because he had a very moving, touching correspondence with his spiritual children, even when he was in the prison, and when he was in exile. And sometimes they are called the spiritual testament of Saint Nikon or spiritual counsels. And I think his advice, well, the things that he writes to his correspondence, they're very simple, as you can see here. I just think this advice, when you feel an aversion for someone, is just so good and very, very touching, I would say. So if you want to have a look at the English translations, I found out that St. Herman's Monastery in Platina, they have translated some of the books, and you can look up these books on their website. I will provide a link later. So now coming to the historical bit of this history of Optina. As you can see here, the monastery was badly damaged in the Soviet period. It was closed in 1923. All the monks were banned or exiled or killed. The last hegumen of the monastery, Elder Isaaki, was actually shot by the Bolsheviks, and so most of the people were either killed or just exiled, and all the monks were banned from the monastery. They were not allowed to live there even as secular workers. And then the Soviet authorities didn't really know what to do with the monastery because it was so huge. So they used it as a prison, for a juvenile detention center, tractor repair workshop, and so on. But in the end, it just came into such disrepair that they didn't use it for anything, and the people just settled there. So by the time when Optina was returned to the Russian Orthodox Church, there were just random people living in all the buildings. And it seemed to them that this belongs to them because this is their dwellings. And it was very difficult for the monastery to get, well, rid of these inhabitants. And the monastery had to buy apartments for all these people. So they had to pay them out. This is the church of the Kazansky Cathedral. This is how it looked when I first came to Optina in 1990. And this is what it looks now, a beautiful church, beautifully painted and fully restored. And this is how the revival of Optina began in 1988. This was the millennium of the baptism of Russia. And the Soviet authorities decided to return some monasteries to the Russian Orthodox Church as a sign of their goodwill. And Optina was one of those monasteries. And this was also the year when Saint Ambrose was glorified among the saints. And you can see this is the first celebration of Saint Ambrose of Optina, in Optina. And behind you can see the Kazansky Cathedral in its ruined state. This is what it looked like. And this is what the brothers had to do when they received the monastery. So it was a lot of work. The whole monastery was turned into a building site. And this is a very special site of the Optina bricks of Optinsky Kirpichi. Because this was for many years the work of the children who arrived to Optina. So my family and my friends and my classmates, when we came to Optina, this was our work to sort these bricks. So the unforgettable bricks you can see, these are just some children from another group, but this was done by the kids because there were just no people who could do that. So many people, when they learned about the return of Optina, decided to actually come and help. And my school, the Vladimir school, so many children from our school wanted to come and help that we had to book two huge couches to actually transfer the people to who were willing to help. There was no place to stay, so we slept on the floor, but it didn't prevent us from going there. And we realized that we needed our own place during the summer, and that's how our camp appeared. And this year we were supposed to celebrate our 30th anniversary, 30 years, but we were prevented by the unholy COVID. And this is a short video that I want to show you, just some bits of it. It's not very good quality, but you will see how we interact with the monks in our daily life. I hope. Maybe it won't work. This is what I was fearing. Never mind. This is just another photo of the camp people, all pointing to our leader, who is in the center, a very small gray-haired lady, my mother, who has been the camp leader for 30 years. And we made our own T-shirts, and everyone had their own drawing on it, and people just made some, pictures of the monastery or of the camp. And these are the first campers from 30 years before. So this picture was taken 5 years ago. We are a bit older now, but this is how we looked 5 years ago. But apart from good memories and sweet memories and wonderful memories, there also are some bitter memories and sad memories. And one of them is the murder of the Optina brothers on Easter Day in 1993. Then this is when we were in Optina and we were witnesses to that. And that was very, it still puzzles me why it had to happen like that. But the story goes that a man who probably was insane, or I would say he was possessed by an evil spirit, because he was a Satanist, and he confessed that he did this to please his Lord. He killed 3 monks. He stabbed them in the back while they were ringing the bells. So the 2 of them, you can see them here on the little bell place, Father Ferapont and Father Trafim. They were the bell ringers, and they went to ring the bells for the early liturgy, which was to be celebrated in the skeet. So this is them just a few days before they were killed here on the same spot. And the 3rd victim was hieromonk Vasily, Father Basil, and he was a very special person. He's well known among all the people who love Optina, who visit Optina, because he he also left a diary, and he also was a poet. So he left some poetry, and he was famous for that. And people know much less about the other two brothers, and this is monk Trofim and monk Ferapont here, down here, who were kind of quieter people. And Father Vasily was responsible for talking to the pilgrims, so he was outspoken and people knew him. And when he died, when he was killed, this was a huge tragedy, a huge shock for all his spiritual children. And not many people actually knew the other two, Father Ferapont and Father Trofim, monk Ferapont and monk Trofim. But we knew them quite well, especially Father Trofim. He was a very special friend of our camp. And he always helped us with some physical tasks, and he visited us. He would come on a horse and greet us. He was a very, very kind person, and a very strong person physically. So it was, when they were killed, nobody could understand how these three strong people could not resist the murderer, and why they didn't resist him, and how all that happened. Well, that happened, of course. It was dark, it was unexpected, so nobody expected anything like that. So Father Ferapont and Father Trofim, who were here on the bell tower, were killed immediately, and they died very, very soon. And Father Vasily unfortunately received wounds that did not really kill him, but were lethal, and he died from bleeding, actually. And that was very difficult for the brothers who actually took him to the hospital. So he died in their hands, let's say. So this was a huge shock for everyone. And of course, although we knew that it is a blessing to die on an Easter day after the liturgy, and quite a few people say that I would like to die on Easter day, it still was a very difficult moment for everyone in Optina, and it shocked everyone, and the police and all the lay people and people who knew nothing about Optina learned about this, and they came to Optina, and some of them actually became Orthodox because of this story, of this shock that they received in those days. So what you see now is this little chapel. It's dedicated to the resurrection of the Lord, and this is above, this is built above their tombs, and this is what it looks now inside. So it's very simple, but it will be decorated with the mosaics, and I know that there are plans to maybe change the structure a bit, but for now we don't know. As for if they're going to be canonized, for now there are no plans. So they, the brothers collect stories of people, or their accounts of reports of the miracles that happened due to their prayers to these three fathers. But for now, they said we don't have plans to start the process of canonization or glorification. So this is what Optima looks now. This is a vibrant, huge community. I just wanted to show you a few more things. The Optima is a Stavropigic monastery, Stavropigia. So it's ruled by the patriarch, but he has his, let's say, abbot established in the monastery. And this is Father Leonid, well, Bishop Leonid. He was made a bishop when he was a monk at Optina. So he was made a bishop and sent away. He was away for 5 years, I think, serving as a bishop. And then the previous namestnik, Father Benedict, died 2 years ago, and Father Leonid was brought back and made the namestnik of Optina. He's a very active namestnik, I would say. And this video I just wanted to show, I hope it works.
начало очень важно, чтобы создать с нами Бог разумете. Давайте еще раз до конца довести, да, с нами Бог. С нами Бог. И тут только взяли, да, Бог до конца. С нами Бог разумете, языцы, и покоряйтесь, яко с нами
Just a short video to share with you of the Optina choir, because it's very famous. And of course, because they have so many pilgrims, they have to celebrate many liturgies, and they have many choirs to sing at all the liturgies and all the vigils that they celebrate sometimes simultaneously. So they have to always involve new people in the choir and teach them. And this is, I just love how they sing. Also, another thing that they established last year is the special Optina Lectori, where they invite speakers to talk about the heritage of Optina. And this was the one on Lev Tolstoy and his connection with Optina. So this was a very interesting talk, and they are open to public, so anyone can come and listen. And this is just one of the things that they do. So they continue in the same spirit. They try to continue in the same spirit of publishing, educating, spreading the knowledge, and you know, just establishing people in the spirit of the traditional faith and of the patristic teaching. And in the 90s, in 1990s, they were the first monastery that started reprinting the translations that were made by the Optina elders in the 19th century. So there was this spirit that they still try to keep on, of spreading and sharing the knowledge and the faith. This is the Lectori, and these are some useful web links that you might use. The official website of the monastery has many photos, videos, and other things, but unfortunately it is in Russian, so I'm sorry. But there are English editions of some of the works of the elders, and as I said, St. Herman Press. And also I found this lovely article with information about the elders of Optina on this website of St. Paisius Monastery. So if you're interested to read more, just go there and use that link. And to finish my presentation, which has been very long, I'm so sorry. I want to show you to share with you my favorite video from the website. Probably some of you have already seen it, but I just love it. This was filmed in the skeet, so you can see the skeet interiors, what it looks like in the winter. Well, that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. If you're still there, I'm ready to answer your questions if you have any questions. And thank you for listening and watching.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was absolutely wonderful to hear the full history from how significant it was, and then it had this quiet time over the Soviet period, and then has really been reborn, resurrected as such an important place again in the hearts of the Russian people as well as the people at the monastery. I wonder, I don't think you mentioned how many brothers there are at the monastery now.
Well, there are about 200 people altogether. So there are monks and novices, and if we count them all together, it's about 200 people. Mm-hmm. So it's a huge community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things I really enjoyed when we visited, and there were all these different liturgies happening, and we had the opportunity to hear the singing. Everyone knows that I care about the singing, but it's monastic chanting is very special, and we heard the clip of them singing what's Znameny chant, so the single line melody, which is very old, very ancient in Russia. But they also had, in some of the churches, they would have 2 choirs, antiphonal choirs in the large cathedral. They also had just 2 or 3 singers singing at one of the liturgies, and in fact it went down to one singer at one point, and he was just singing. I think I'm right in saying that he just makes things up, which sound right. And then in another church again, there was a mixed choir, so with women who are, I assume, well known to the monastery and perhaps come from the local community. So it struck me when we were there that there's this a very diverse singing, but also diverse iconography. Some of the different churches are decorated in very different ways. Was that very deliberate? Was that the case in the 19th century, or is that really a development of recent years?
Well, thank you, Margaret. There are 2 questions as I can see. So the first question about singing. When Optina was reopened in the 90s, they didn't really have a clear view of what the singing should be. So some of the brothers who joined, because you can imagine we didn't have a tradition of monastic singing for so many years. So some brothers who joined had instruction before at the Holy Trinity St. Sergius Lavra. So they brought with them this kind of joyful, loud, beautiful singing from the Holy Trinity St. Sergius Lavra, from Archimandrit Matvei. And this was one of the traditions that kind of remained in Optina, the singing in parts. That's why they sometimes, because they don't have so many people, and you can imagine that it's every day, and sometimes people get ill or tired, so they do have some people who come and sing just as their work. They live nearby, and they are kind of members of this community. But most of the times, all the singing is done by the monks, and when there are not enough of them, they have to sing, you know, just it's 1 person or 2 persons, and that's how they started to develop their own 2-part singing, which is based on the Znameny, but it's simplified. And they actually produced their own collection of music. So there is sheet music on their website, and there is a whole liturgy written out. So if anyone wants, they can download and use it. So that's how it came. And yes, some people may just some of our friends who sing there, because we are friends with all the singers, of course, and they come to our camp, and we some of our campers join the choir. So sometimes, as you listen, you can see that this is something that was just made up on the spot. So yes. As for iconography, I wanted to include more of that in the presentation, but it would have been too long. So what I would suggest, if you're interested, to anyone, go to the website and check out the 3D tours, because they have amazing photos there, very good quality, and you can see all the details. The iconography is, in my opinion, and of course I'm partial, but it is one of the most beautiful iconographic programs in Russia now. It's superbly done. It's very well thought through, so it's not just, you know, random paintings, random, you know, frescoes. This was done in the past 30 years by a very good team, a very special team, very talented iconographers, and also some professional artists who came from secular universities, who joined in this kind of effort, and they helped, and they, well, shared their expertise, and they advised. So this was a joint effort. But then somehow I would say that a generation of Optina icon painters, iconographers grew, and they now have really good masters, I would say, artists, real artists.
Yes, absolutely. I can attest to that. We've had a question from Yonuts, which is a practical question, and he said, if we visit in winter, is the church and the guest accommodation rooms reasonably warm? Now, I know the answer to this, but you can tell us.
Well, of course, we Russians are famous for being good at clothing ourselves and warming our houses and our churches, so it's very warm. The problem is, if you visit around Christmas time, as was the case with you and me, Margaret, it might be very busy. So if you want to come and have a room at the monastery, you have to book in advance. This is really important. So, but if you come after Christmas, after old calendar Christmas, it is more relaxed and there are not so many people there. And actually, if anyone wants to come in the winter, I would advise January, because it's very beautiful. It's a bit colder than December, but you will have snow. And it's kind of, you know, this holy days between Christmas and Epiphany, and it's just, and there are not so many people.
Yeah. It was certainly something that I noticed while we were there, is the amount of monks who are priests, and that's clearly necessary because you have so many services and people wanting to make confession. So is that tradition of spiritual guidance still there at Optina?
Well, that's Margaret, this is a very difficult question, because so many people who read about Optina in the 90s or in the early 2000s, and they were fascinated by the Optina elders, and they wanted to take part in that experience, and they come to Optina and they expect to find the elders still there. And well, that's not the case. I'm not saying that the fathers of Optina do not have spiritual expertise or wisdom or anything, but as I said before, we had a tradition interrupted in the Soviet period. So 70 years of absence is not something you can easily jump over. So there are some fathers who are, let's say, more respected, and people come to them if they have some spiritual question and problem. And especially there is a very famous figure who is called Starets, because he looks very old. He's been very sick, like Father Ambrose, Saint Ambrose, and he's definitely a Starets looking person. And he is considered by many people, by many monks around Russia, as a Starets, as an elder. But he refuses to be called an elder. So that's a difficult question. And another problem is that he is now the spiritual father of the patriarch, and he doesn't live in Optina. So he comes and goes, but he's not always there. He used to live there until maybe 5 years ago, but he's now mostly in Peredelkina. But people still come to Optina to find him. And it's very funny because they do not distinguish between the schema monks. So when Father Ili, Starets Ili, arrives at Optina and he needs to go unnoticed, you know, there are people ambushing him at every corner. The brothers have developed a very good way of distracting the attention. So they send out from the church another scammer monk, and all the women, all those pilgrims, they rush and follow him, and they start asking questions, and Father Eli just escapes unnoticed. So that's one way of doing it. But of course, this is a bit problematic that people come with unrealistic expectations, and that's the problem.
Yeah. I wonder whether you could say a little bit more about your family's connection and how that developed between Moscow and Optina a little bit.
Just very quickly, because it's getting late here in Russia, and I don't want to tire anyone. It was a miracle, as always with Optina. Everything is a miracle, or divine providence, as you might say. In 1990, when our school, it was the first non-state school in Russia, which was opened after the revolution, and it was an Orthodox school, which is another miracle. So you can imagine we were still in the Soviet Union. So when the school was opened, we were looking for a place where people, not we, of course, my parents, I was 11 then. So they were looking for a place where they could go on a pilgrimage, because there were only very few monasteries open in Russia in that time. Danilov Monastery in Moscow, Donskoy, was just returned. The Lavra, the Holy Trinity Lavra, and Optina was one of the first places. And so a friend of my mother, who runs an Orthodox pilgrimage company, invited her to take some children to Optina. And he said, I have a bus, so it can take you to Optina, but you will have to return on your own. And so that's how we went. It was a small group of girls, mostly, with our parents and teachers. And when we arrived at Optina, it looked exactly like those pictures that I showed you, even worse. But we made some friends among the brothers in the first 10 minutes after our arrival, and we were fed and we were entertained and we were given gifts, because we could sing prayers, and that was something rare at that time. Not every girl could sing a prayer, and we had a small choir between us. So we were so overwhelmed, we were so inspired, that when we came back, we could not talk about anything else. I found my diary from that time, and every second word in those entries is very, very beautiful, very amazing, very wonderful. So everything was sharing our experience with our friends, with our classmates. So the next time, when the vacation came, everyone wanted to go. And so the group turned into a 40 people group, and we had to find a bus and so on. And that's how it grew. And then, as I said, in the summer, we realized that we wanted to spend longer time, not just 5-7 days, but maybe a month. And my mom asked the fathers how we could do that. And they said, well, we should look for a place for you. And they showed us a lovely place on the bank of the forest lake. And that's where our camp was originally situated, in the forest, on the lake. That was beautiful, but very dangerous, because local people came there to drink. So it was, not a very safe place for children. And so later, the forestry, the civil authorities, because this is a national reserve, and they said, well, actually, we are going to use this lake for fishing, so you should move. And we were just devastated. But they found us a nice place in the pine forest on the other side of Optina, so that's where the camp is now. And it's been there ever since, for the last 15 years. So it's wonderful there. So when we first came, the problem was what to do with the children, how to occupy them. I mean, of course, the bricks were there always. When it wasn't the bricks, it was something else. There was always something to clean, to repair, to whatever. But then they realized that there were things that only the children could do. And one of these things was a blessing and a very special task. When the relics of the Optina fathers were found in 1996, and there was the glorification, there was a huge celebration, thousands of people came. So it was I would say the whole Russia came to Optina, but of course it's just an exaggeration. They wanted to give everyone a small blessing. So they started distributing the particles of the coffins, of the wooden boards, like small shards that they could, split the boards from the coffins, because they were also preserved. And they would put them in little plastic bags with the name of the elder whose coffin that was, and then give them as a blessing to the pilgrims. And of course, children with their little fingers were much faster with that task than big brothers with their big hands. So for many years, that was the task of the Optina camp, to do that, to distribute those little particles.
Oh, that's a great blessing. And to have those secondary relics in your hands must have been wonderful.
Yes.
I'm going to give people just one last opportunity to ask any further questions they have. In the meantime, what do you see as the future? When we were there was still building work going on. There's still expanding and developing and making these steps forward. What do you think is in the future for Optina?
I think they're mostly done with their building, repairing. There's always something to do, of course, but I mean, that's, as I said, they're now turning more to the original things that the elders were doing, like the elders Makari and Ambrose and others. Again, producing new translations, new editions, lectorium. They're very good with producing videos, so really professional. So because the younger people prefer to have everything in video format. So I think that they're going to concentrate more on the educational activity. But well, there's always something, so we don't know. And of course, this year it was also a huge hit for them, because the monastery was severely hit by the pandemic. 80 brothers were ill. Nobody died, but 80 brothers were ill, and they had to convert one of the monastery hotels into a hostel, actually, like a hospital rather. So, and they had to close the monastery from visitors, and of course they didn't have any donations, and they didn't have any money, and of course you have to actually feed everyone and all the workers. So it was a difficult time for them. They're all right now, but it shows how much is, unstable. So you can't really be sure about what the next day brings to you.
Yeah. Well, I hope when the pandemic enables us to, many of us can go and be pilgrims to Optina as well, and see what a beautiful place it is, what a holy place it is, and ask for the intercessions of all the Optina elders and the new martyrs as well. I certainly had the most wonderful time there. I encourage everyone to go. And I want to thank you again, Anna, for giving us this presentation, for sharing your personal experiences and so much history and colour as well. I'm really grateful. Lots of people saying thank you in the chat box as well, and spasiba. And we're really grateful for you having done this.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. And a reminder that next week we will be visiting Transfiguration Monastery, which is in Elwood City in Pennsylvania, in the USA. And I don't want to say too much because hopefully it will be a lovely surprise, but there is a link to Romania again. So we've managed to have lots of links between different places with our series. Please look out for the recording of this session if you weren't able to listen to the whole thing. I hope to have it up by tomorrow. Just depends how quickly I can turn it round. But thank you all for joining us, and hope to see you next week and the following week as well, for Lebanon, for the final 2 of our virtual visits to monasteries. Thank you all for joining us. Good night.